second. Okay, now the audio is going. Okay. Hi, I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here tonight with Paladin from the White Hats, and we are going to be talking about the history of the White Hats. And this is a very fascinating subject, and one that I've been wanting to go back over because there's a lot of heroics, I think, in the background that you don't know about with regard to the White Hats. And some of it's gotten forgotten over time. And they did a lot of work. And it looks like some of their work might even be paying off as we speak now. So Paladin is not on camera. And as I noticed in the early part, we got to make sure that when we are muted and when we're not muted, etc. So Paladin, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hey everyone, how you doing? Thanks for that introduction, Kerry. I appreciate it. I know this is a show we've talked about for a while, and so I've been looking forward to it.
Great. And Paladin is, as I have said, a forensic financial investigator. He has been doing this for many, many years, and he is not coming on camera because he is still what he calls a PI, and that helps him be somewhat undercover when necessary, if I understand it correctly. So Paladin, you want to pitch in here and kind of give yourself a background briefly for those that haven't seen the other interviews we've done.
Okay. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. I worked 5 years in the corporate world. Half of that time was as a corporate auditor. The other half was a financial manager and assistant treasurer for a manufacturing facility. I've been a licensed PI for 30 years. I've been a general contractor, held a real estate license. As you mentioned, an expert witness in forensic accounting. I've had contracts with law enforcement to do backgrounds. Worked on the OJ case. Have done probably every kind of investigation a PI would do. I've done work for attorneys as far as litigation support for both civil cases and criminal cases. I've collaborated with the FBI, the Attorney General's office out of Washington, D.C. on cases, the IRS, CID. Okay, that's enough.
All right.
That's enough.
Yeah. One thing is, it's great fun for, he's an old friend, but also it's fun for me to see you try to weasel out of things. So you don't like to say a lot about yourself, and it's just the way you are. I think it also goes with your job, right?
Well, yeah, I think, we've been trained, I think, in the last 30 or 40 or 50 years to gravitate to a talking head, and then everything that person becomes a rock star, media people. And so then we believe every single thing they say. It's like, what's your confirmation? Well, so-and-so said it. And in my mind, so-and-so has, he has all this credibility, or she has all this credibility. So anything and everything they say has to be true. And for me, it's just the opposite. It's not about the deliverer of the information. It's the information itself. You don't want the deliverer of the information to taint the information. Like when I did background investigations for police officers, I never offered my opinion on whether that person should pass the background. That was up to the person, the training lieutenant in personnel. That was his or her decision whether that person passed the background. Now, if I found things where they violated the hiring standards, I would point that out. But I reported everything just as it came across. I took opinions out. When you testify in court as an expert witness, you show just a little bit of an opinion, and they will come. The other side will come after you. So that's just my work. It's not about me and who I am. It's about the information that I give you. And I like to tell everybody, don't ever take my word for it. Research it on your own, because it means more if you look at it, you assess it, and you make your own determination. And if it's, similar to mine, that's great. But I think everybody has to find their own path to get to the truth. So, if I can, my information can point people, our information could point people in certain directions. Let the information that we give you speak for itself.
Absolutely. Well, and I agree with that philosophy, no doubt about it. However, and I think we're getting a bit of an echo. I think that's coming from your end, maybe. I'm not sure. So I'm going to turn the sound down a tiny bit here. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm going to my website to just show everyone what I've got there. And I am describing this interview tonight, and I'm going to tell you what it's going to be about. And I just want you to see that it's on my website as well. And there's a quote there from the White Hats, what it's called, the White Hats reports.com. And you can go over and see their website. And I think I managed to also put that link that we were talking about. Yeah, I did, which has some documentation on it, because you guys specialize in documentation. And I'd also want to say that this is about financial fraud, deception at the highest levels of government. And their investigation has led them through high yield trading programs used to finance the secret space program and black projects, as well as other things, no doubt. And then I just want to see, I don't know, you could read it. I don't know if you can see this though, but you've got it on your website. You say that we are a group who have banded together to assist in the world's awakening by reporting truth and exposing our fraudulent corporate government. We bring forth information that the mainstream media refuses to report, and our news comes from high-level inside intelligence sources. So that is the White Hats. And then we've got a link down here also above, again, on my website, projectcamelotportal.com or projectcamelot.tv. And I go to the Paladin, obviously, a blog item on my website. And you can click on this particular item, and then you can see some of the documentation that they have already put out there. And you have how many reports? Is it 58, 48?
Yeah, I think we're 58, maybe. Well,
okay.
Yeah, we're at number 58. We haven't done 48 yet, so that number hasn't been released at this point. So I guess we've done 57.
All right. Okay. So soon to be coming 58, right?
Well, probably 48 at the way it looks.
Oh, right. So you're going to go back to 48, which never showed up. Okay, that's all part of the history, and that's what we're here today to talk about and to find out about. So this is really your game. I'm going to sort of prod you and help you along when I think there are things that, might need further explanation. But I'd love you to tell the history of the White Hats and really start, how you guys got formed and so on. And I do want to say that I texted you, but I got some back channel information today that is actually talking about how the Trump administration and the people behind Trump are, including the military, are cleaning house in a very big way and going overseas as well in the process. And it looks like they may be taking down the New World Order. If you even want to look at the news item from Rothschild today saying, that Trump is trying to take down the New World Order. So basically he's saying that's a bad thing, and we think that's a very good thing. So this is right. I mean, this is actually happening on a night and a time when it looks like there are some efforts to take back our country. There are some efforts to take down the pedophiles, etc. So I think this is a great time for you. So let's go right ahead, and you lead the way.
Okay, and it's interesting. I was prepared for this, but I do not know when the White Hats essentially got together. But on Report 36, at the beginning of Report 36, we talk about a meeting that took place in London at a safe house. And that's when the White Hats were born. So, you know, if somebody wants to go there and read the beginning, it's in italics, I believe, to 36. They can see how we were formed. Now, how the White Hats reports were created. I don't know if anybody remembers Christopher Story, Edward Harl. Okay, I you know, the name of his website that he used to have escapes me. World Reports, I don't know, something like that. But you can find all of his reports at christopherstory.org. I did research this. Somebody is keeping all of his stuff going, which is good.
Okay.
So anyway, all right. So he passed away in July of 2010. And some of the White Hats in the U.S. got together in a Midwestern city for the weekend to attend a rib fest. Do you know what a rib fest is?
Not by that name anyway.
Well, it's kind of a thing in the Midwest and other parts of the country where in the summertime, several companies who sell ribs, brisket, barbecued stuff, and I'm probably not explaining this well. Anyway, they come to the cities and they have what they call a rib fest, and that rib fest usually starts on Friday night and it goes till Sunday. They have bands that come in and play. They have a street, you know, like a street setup where you can walk through and do shopping and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, there was a rib fest that we attended in the Midwest, and it was interestingly, I was thinking about all the attendees the other day, and none of us were from the state that we had the meeting at. So I guess I can say it was in Columbus, Ohio. But anyway, for those, you know, those on the other side who are listening in. So anyway, we met in Columbus and we discussed Christopher Story passing, because at that point in time, he had talked about the global settlements, our guys being in Richmond, Virginia, trying to get the global settlements done. There was some talk of Leo Wanta at that point. And so, you know, that weekend, I said, guys, somebody has got to carry on this tradition of exposing these guys. Okay, somebody has got to do it, and we are right in the middle of it. We're placed, you know, at the point of the spear where we're getting information, we're getting intelligence, because we are trying to get the global settlements released. At that time, we were also involved with Falcone, trying to get his funds. Eventually, CMKX with Al Hodges came on board, Wanta came on board, Tropos came on board, and a couple of heads of state came on board from other countries, because they were all owed money from the same people. So all these people got on the train. They were on the train, so to speak. So I said, guys, we've got to start putting this out. So anyway, after I think this meeting took place in it was either the last part of July or first part of August, but anyway, of 2010, the summer. So anyway, it took me 5 months basically to convince them that we're going to put this stuff out. So we released our first pseudo report, I guess. It was really bullet points and just nothing put together in a coherent report, but it was just some shocking things. And we just thought, okay, let's put this out and see what happens. And I think at that point in time, we had a mutual friend that knew you. And so she mentioned that, you know, maybe Kerry might be interested. So we reached out to you through her. And so we kind of launched this thing. And then our second report, because of the response that we got, there was a big response. And honestly, we did it at Ben Fulford's site, of all places, in the comments, you know, in the whatever you want to call those, the comment section, you know, where people go in and put their comments based on his weekly reports. That's where we did it, just as a test. Well, it took off. It was interesting because, you know, you can track that stuff over the internet, put it in a search engine and find out all the places they picked it up. And we thought, nah, maybe we got something here. So then our second report had to do with Walter Fauntleroy, who was representing the Black Caucus, sent a letter to Obama about Falcone's money. Why weren't they returning Falcone's money? And that got a big reception too. And it just kind of took off from there. So anyway, you had a lot to do with that. Because I think you were really the first one to carry it, and of course we eventually started talking, and and I knew the first question would be, will you do an interview, or will anybody do an interview? And of course the answer was no for the longest time. So we started doing our reports. Eventually they were picked up in a lot of places. We had a pretty good following. We could check the back end to see where the traffic was coming from. It was 75 or 80 countries. Most of it was the US, Canada, and the UK, but we had a lot of following. I mean, it was all over the world. It was countries I'd never heard of, even Vietnam. I mean, places that I didn't even know had the internet. So we had an impact. We had a lot of people. We were getting a lot of feedback. The more and more information we put out, the more feedback we were getting. And you guys can go through, you can go through the reports and look at the chronological sequence. But the issue with Falcone, we didn't talk much about the global settlements. Story had talked about those ad infinitum, and the person involved there really didn't want that to be out in the open. So we concentrated on Falcone, who had money to invest in a trading program that he wanted to use to try to rebuild Miami that had just got hit with a hurricane. And this was, I don't know, back 2005, 6, 7, whenever that hurricane hit Miami. That was part of the reason they were going to raise humanitarian. It was a humanitarian project. So anyway, he went to Romney. Romney said, no worries, I can help you. He engaged a couple of guys named Jeanette and Herzog, and they took his money, they put it in a trading program and never paid him. So Falcone went to the authorities, he went to Biden, he went to the FBI, he went to everybody that would listen to him to try to get him to investigate this and get his money back. And of course, it was trading programs. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to deal with him. So when we got involved, we started tracing this money, and it was traded, and Romney was paid off, and Biden was paid off, and Clinton was paid off, and Herzog was paid off, and Jeanette was paid off. And all these guys were paid off for helping abscond with the money. And basically the two people who got the most benefit out of it were Obama and George Bush Sr. Those were the guys who got the trading profits, who were in control of the money.
Okay, now I want you to pause for a minute and explain to people what a trading program is. And this is a high yield trading program, I think is the proper term for it.
Okay, so you want me to explain the thing that nobody wants to talk about, right?
Yep.
But
I do, because
right.
that's kind of your ace in the hole. And I have to say that I don't know about the other members, but I know that this is kind of your baby or your area of expertise, wouldn't you say? And I can talk about what I know about them, but you know a lot more, so it's probably better if you run with it.
Okay. And just to sort of back up a little bit, in my PI business, I probably 20 years ago is when I got my first case of investors who had invested money into what's known as a trading program, and they got ripped off. They needed a private investigator. They were from New Zealand. They were getting sued because they had raised the money from some farmers in New Zealand. And so they actually went to London first to try to get into a trading program. They couldn't do it there, so they came over to the States and ended up giving the money to a lady in Southern California, in Orange County. And so they were actually facing criminal charges in New Zealand because and they were basically brokers, the two guys who collected the money from the farmers to invest in the trading program. These were the two guys who came to London and then flew to the States. They were being charged in New England. They were under criminal indictment in New Zealand. I'm sorry, it was in New Zealand. This is the first case I got. So anyway, we tracked it down. We got their money back for them. It was $500,000. And the interesting part was we took, there was a fee. We took our fee, the attorney and I took our fee. And then we sent the money down to New Zealand, which ended up getting the people who hired us to do the work. It ended up getting them off the hook criminally because they were able to return the money to all the farmers. The ironic thing about the whole thing was there was an exchange rate when they converted the, New Zealand dollars into US dollars. At the time that we got their money back, which was probably 3 or 4 years later, when we took our fee out of it, because of the exchange rate had turned favorable for New Zealand, they actually got more money back than what they had originally invested in New Zealand dollars, which was kind of ironic. So anyway, that was my first foray into trading programs. Okay, so I did a lot of investigations of people, and it was always people with investments, people that,
Okay, and there's a base amount that you have to have in order to get involved. And I'm going to tell you that I've had a CIA agent tell me that the people who are the go-betweens are the CIA, and that you need a minimum, correct me if I'm wrong, $100,000. Is that right?
100 million.
100 million. Okay. See, I don't know the zeros, but 100 million. And according to my source, and I don't know if you agree with this, it can only be one person.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Okay. And so, so where there was actually two situations that I would encounter, because the first case we were successful. We were able to get the money back, and that spread like wildfire. Then we got all kinds of cases. So, because this is a problem, and I can tell you why it's a problem. The problem is just what you mentioned, because the CIA is involved in it. And so let me back up. Okay, you're absolutely correct. You cannot aggregate, the term is aggregate. You cannot aggregate funds, which means that it does have to be one person. The owner of the money, it only can be one person. Okay, there's one owner. So there are well-meaning people out there trying to get into a program, and what they're doing is they're trying to figure a way, because nobody, how many people have 100 million in their bank account that they can, put into a trading program? Well, not very many. So well-meaning brokers try to put together a group of people. Sometimes they try to form a trust. Sometimes they try to form a corporation, an offshore trust, an IBC, International Business Corporation. They try all these various ways to do it, but it never works. And what happens is those people, those investors, you have to get, because it's the catch-22. If somebody had $100 million and they wanted to go in a trading program, there's a process that you have to go through where they have to check the money and make sure it's real, and check the lineage and make sure it's not dirty and all this kind of stuff. Well, those guys could never do that, but they could never get to the table to talk to a trader to get into a trade unless they had the money, because the first thing they'd have to do is prove up. We need to do a proof of funds. Okay, so a proof of funds and a letter of intent, and then you have to prove it up. So the catch-22 is that the people that were trying to aggregate enough people into a deal did not know the details of the deal, because they can't get close to a trader until they get the money amassed. Okay, so that's one line. Okay, then you've got the other line, and the other line is that you have fraudsters out there who actually will do this, will try to aggregate money from investors, but they never have any intention of going into a program. Okay, and those people are the ones that we refer to like the Bernie Madoffs. Okay, those are the Ponzi scheme guys. Okay, because you can't pay people 30, 40, 50% without being in a trading program, and you can't pay them on any kind of an investment. The only way you can pay them is you crank that machine up and you get people to come in constantly, because you create this fervor about returns on investment, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so in that second group, whenever we went into that investigation, guess what? There was always a CIA guy in there someplace. Okay, there was always a contact. He was the guy that could get you into the trade or whatever. Well, anyway, long story short, in the deals that would go bad, which are basically the ones where somebody just takes your money and says, yeah, I can get you into a trade and I'll take your money. And basically they abscond with your money and there's nothing you can do about it. And if they're CIA guys, you go to the authorities and they're not going to do anything about it, because as I got into this for 5, 6, 7 years, I noticed that there was a set of people who were pulling these scams off constantly, and nothing ever happened to them. And there would be a well-meaning person who would try to put together a group, and they would get arrested by the FBI. And it's like, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. Okay. So anyway, to make a long story short, your CIA guy, what he's telling you is absolutely correct. It can only be one person. It can only be, and it's 100 million. It used to be 100 million. It could be higher than that at this point. Now, what these are for, the purpose of these are to generate funds for humanitarian projects. And if anybody has read the
so-called.
Well, I mean, if no, they do. I mean, they do it. There's two forms. Okay, there's one form where they actually do this for humanitarian projects, and what happens is they need money. They need investment money to go in to buy midterm notes. And Lord James talked about this in his 10-minute speech in February of 2012, where the banks trade these notes back and forth overnight, and they make 1 to 3% per day. Okay, 1 to 3% per day. That's a lot of money. Okay, that's almost 100% a month. Hello?
Okay, but there's also and you know.
And so I'm trying to make the point. Okay.
Right.
And you know, it's interesting because when I was in the corporate world, every Friday I had to call the corporate office and tell them I'm either going to wire transfer you some money or I need you to wire transfer me money. And and I may have said this before, but the corporate controller would always say, I need you to tell me to make sure that the money gets to your bank on Friday. He said, because if anybody grabs that money on the way down, I want to know about it because we'll stop doing business with them. And I said, because, you know, I was just a young, dumb. Anyway, I said, why would a bank take the money over the weekend? And he said, because they'll invest it. Okay. So we can't do any investing over the weekend, but the banks do it. Okay. So when I say 1 to 3%, you got to take that by 30 days. Okay. So the high end is 90% in 1 month. All right. This is the kind of returns that they get. All right. So anyway, what your CIA guy is telling you is correct. Now, what they do with this money is they use it for you. This is the way they raise money. This is, you know, people like to say, the government just prints money. If they need money, they just go print it. Well, that's true, but this is the mechanism by which they put the money out there. Okay. So what happens is you block off your $100 million. You go into trade. These MTMs are traded. There's a contract, usually with the Federal Reserve. We have a copy of one of the contracts. They assure the investor that he won't make any more than 165% a quarter. Okay.
Yes.
Which is 650% is what it works out to a year return on his investment. Okay. So this is the kind of money that these people get. That's why you have so many people trying to get into these programs. Okay. But they don't, you know, they don't realize that just what you said that's the rule. There's only one person. So you and I, Kerry, if we had you know, 50 million each and we wanted to put it together for 100 million to go in a program and it was clean, clear, you know, and all this other stuff, they wouldn't do it. It has to be one person. Okay.
Well, you could give me your 50 million, right?
What's that?
You could give me your 50 million.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, but we'd have to do it on trust in our own contract separate. And you can't go to the authorities because actually what you haven't said so far is that you can even go on the internet and look this up, and they're going to tell you, even the FBI, if you go to them, is going to say there's no such thing. They don't exist.
Right.
and they do exist. It's a lie. And it's also one question that you use to vet a person in finance, from Karen Hudis on down, to see if they really know what's going on. Because if they don't know about high yield trading programs, they don't know anything.
Well, yeah, and what I was going to say about the confession of an economic hitman, there's two parts to this, and I know we've talked about this before. There's the raising the money part, which is the trading programs. Then there is the use of the money for the humanitarian projects. Okay, so let's look at that side for just a minute. Once the, let's say we do get our money into a trading program and we go for a year and we get, we get 70, 60, 75%, we get let's say we get 150% a quarter, so we get 600%. So, we put in 100 million and we get back 600 million. Okay, well, this has thrown off enough money to fund a project, because there's a profit split between us and the Federal Reserve, and then the banks take a piece, the trading bank, the traders get money. I mean, everybody involved in these transactions gets a piece, but it's like a quarter of a point, it's a half a point, because when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, a quarter of a point is a lot of money. So anyway, what happens? This money, so the project gets funded, and at the end of the day, the project raises X amount of money, 500 million. The investor gets paid, his part. The Federal Reserve gets their part. The traders get their part. The banks get their part. Everybody's happy, and we just created 500 million, or whatever the case is, of new money. That's what it is. It's basically new money. Okay, so what they do is they give this to a village in South America who needs a power plant. And of course, the advanced guys like John Perkins goes in and he works with the tribal elders and he works with the local people, and he does all the numbers and basically goes to the tribal elder and says, look, we're going to get you 500 million. You're going to be a hero because all your people, all the people that you rule over are going to have electricity. And so to get you to help us do this, we're going to slide you 50 million of this money. Okay. And let us know if there's anybody else we need to pay off. We can pay them off. So anyway, the money comes over, and so here we are in a third world country. Well, they don't have any Halliburtons or Bechtels or any guys like that. So who do you think gets the contracts to build the power plant in the first place? It's our guys, right? It's the Cabal's guys, the Halliburtons and the Bechtel, the usual suspects. Okay, the same guys who've benefited in Vietnam and all these other places. They're the ones who have because they're logistics. It's the logistics part of the military industrial complex that has to go in and has to set up the camps and the bases and the communications and all that. Well, this is what they're doing. Okay, so they know going in that the numbers are not going to work, that these people are never going to be able to pay this loan off, right? So what happens after 5 years or 10 years? Well, guess what? The repo man comes, and that's the banksters. Okay, so follow this through now. So you got an investor who puts money into this deal, and they do the trading for 40 weeks or a year or 2 years or however long it takes to generate enough profit to fund the project. All these people make money. The Federal Reserve makes money. The investor makes money. The traders make money. The banks make money. Everybody makes money. Okay, so then you got John Perkins on the other end, who's got a place, who's got a home for this money. So the money goes there to whoever is supposed to get it based on the humanitarian project guidelines. And then the American or the Cabal companies, corporate people come in and actually do the project. So they're the ones who end up getting the money, right? They get the money, and they leave the third world country with the tab to pay it off. So then if they can't pay it off, they just come in and repossess the plant, and they can then, lower the rates and get paid for the electricity that they're providing. But the thing of it is, they've got no investment in it. They get it for free. They've got no investment in it whatsoever.
Okay, but so you've also not said that this is a key part as well, that the initial investor, my understanding is they only get, they think they're going to get a long-term investment of return, but it doesn't even last a year. my understanding is the normal one lasts maybe 3 months to 6 months, and then they get cut out of the deal, and then they have no recourse.
Well, okay, now you're getting into another area. Okay, most of them, as far as I know, and this could have changed, most of them are 40 weeks. Are 40 weeks. That's typically the way they're structured. Now, some last longer, some last, less time. And, I mean, I guess nobody wonders when there's a hurricane in Florida and the hurricane in Texas and Puerto Rico, and there's an earthquake, in Iran, and, and all these buildings are damaged. I never hear anybody talk about how where's the money coming from to pay for this, right? To rebuild. Where's the money? Well, they're creating it out of thin air. And I always think of a project. I always think of a trading program. It's like, well, there's going to be another trading program. I see the hurricane hit Texas. Well, there's another trading program. And so that's the way they work it. Now, of course, it varies. It can vary. I mean, it can vary. The amount of time and the returns vary.
Okay, but wasn't it okay? But Falcone and I'm not sure who else was it that they did this, right?
Well, they tried to get in a program, but they just stole their money. And see what happens when you get into that program. You have to sign an agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, where you're not going to disclose anything about that contract. And if you do disclose it, then you'd lose the money, because you can't. It's not like after you make you do a program, you put 100 million in and you get 630 million out. So now you got 730 million. It's not like you can go to the bank and say, hey, I want all my cash. You leave the money is in the bank, right? So if you start talking about it and people find out, they just freeze your money and you don't get it. Now, in some cases, if they think they can get away with it, they will just outright steal it. Okay, and that's what they did with Falcone. That's what they did from the investor that we actually have a copy of the trading contract. And the reason we got a copy is because they didn't pay him. So he doesn't have to abide by what's in the contract because they didn't abide by it. So yeah, you have this situation where even those big players get ripped off. Yes, yeah.
Right. And the other thing that we haven't talked about just briefly is the fact that, this is the whole Neil Keenan Indonesians, that got involved. And that's a very long story. We're not going to get into it. But basically, they were trying to get in a trading program. That's what the Indonesians were trying to do with those, the bonds. And they went strangely to Camelot witnesses, which happened to be Ben Fulford first, and then, Leo Zagami. And they went to the Vatican Bank, and the Vatican Bank, and basically, isn't it, it was Vice President, what's his face? Anyway, who, they were aced out. They were not allowed in, the Indonesians, in the end of the day. So their money got stolen, so to speak, and frozen, right? Anyway, it's a long story, and we're not going to go down that road, but Paladin has really investigated this deeply. And we did a lot of work on it together, kind of tracing things. And so I want to move on to the history of the White Hats, but I wanted to give a background so that people understood that when you're saying that, you worked in this area, this is actually a very important funnel of money into Black projects and basically into the secret space program. And I believe Catherine Austin Fitts is aware of this, although she doesn't describe it, doesn't talk about it.
Yeah, it was funny when you asked her. I think she may have been the only one that I'm aware of that you've interviewed that actually acknowledged that they exist. But then she said she didn't want to talk about it and they were too dangerous.
Yeah.
And those were, that's an accurate statement. But you're absolutely right. People get ripped off too. And Keenan is a good story. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the bonds, because See, people have bonds. Man, that's a whole nother story too, with the bonds out there and the bonds out of the Philippines and the boxes and the gold and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a huge. But
yeah, that's a sidetrack.
Okay,
but you're right. I want to just say though, Kerry, the bonds are not the same as cash in your bank account. Okay, the bonds take another step, and that other step is that you've got to take those to somebody who will give you value for them, use them as collateral to give you cash, and then you can take the cash into the trading program.
I know, but what's kind of funny is like the Indonesians had this huge amount, right, that the bond is worth, and they were willing to take so much less just to get it, you know, in cash return, just to get it in a trading program, and they were locked out. They were not allowed. There was reasons why they're not allowed, and I think there is sort of it's kind of a white man's game, if you want to call it that.
Oh yes, there's no question about that. I don't know this to be, I mean, I can't confirm this because I don't know of every single one they've ever done, but they have. I mean, my understanding is you're exactly right, which is the white people. They won't let the Arabs do it. They won't let the Eastern, they won't let the Chinese or the Japanese in. Now, I could be wrong that, that could have happened.
Could have changed.
There might be
also
ways for them to get, but it's an exclusive club. It's bloodline related, and that's really, all there is to it. But the interesting thing is when people like the person who gave us a copy of their contract, when they get ripped off, it kind of confirms that, because he's Indonesian. Matter of fact, he's royalty in Indonesia.
Right.
The person that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, but you brought up the bonds, and the point I wanted to make, and then we can move on, is I wanted to say that people will, I mean, I've seen people try to use diamonds. I've seen them try to use real estate in order to get cash to then put into the trading programs. And whenever you have those kinds of documents that are very much able to be counterfeit, it's just rife with fraud all over the place. And very little of this ever gets reported in the news. Sure. Because then they'd have to go down a road they would never want to go down.
Right.
So usually what they do is they use, the FBI comes in, arrests you. They provide a press release that they give to the paper. The paper puts it in under a reporter's byline that the FBI wrote themselves, and it's a done deal. And, I mean, and then that's a whole nother story. I mean, that's partially to taint the jury pool. But anyway, we can move on.
I mean, I just want to say that, I don't know where things are at this moment, but this is what we're telling people right now is actually dangerous information to know, right?
Yeah. That's why the people who know it don't talk about it.
Right.
But, the thing of it is, I mean, Lord James talked about it, so it's already out there. And I'm more comfortable talking about it now than if Hillary was president or Obama was. So,
okay,
it's still not.
Fine. So let's continue. Now you've talked, this is kind of where your background is and what your knowledge base is, because it's very pertinent to what you're then going to talk about.
Okay, which is the reports?
The history. No, the actual, I'm expecting you to do sort of a chronology of the history of the White Hat reports. I don't expect you to go into every report, but you could highlight some of the important documents or things that you brought forward, and I don't know where it might have go from there. Okay,
well, I report, if anybody wants to follow along or they want to write this down, I think it was in report 28, because we started putting out information. I mean, we started putting out information about bank accounts. We named the banks, we named the amount of money. I mean, we had a whole list in one of the reports about the Vatican Bank and who had what money in the Vatican Bank. And of course, the Vatican Bank, I think we need to really recognize that they are the guys where a lot of money is parked, because the Vatican Bank is inside you know, it's inside that protected sovereign area, like the city of London is in London and DC is in the United States. So they are completely sovereign, the Vatican Bank. So they don't really report to anybody. It's just they have to comply with normal banking rules, but that doesn't mean that they can't hide money and launder money for people and all this kind of stuff. And that's exactly what they do. So we printed information about the bank accounts at the Vatican Bank. And the thing of it is with the Vatican Bank, that people off, you can make your payoffs, you can put them into the bank, and you know, as long as you've got somebody working with you at the bank, there's no way that you can ever trace them, because you can send a wire and you can put it to the attention of some bank officer, and he basically becomes the catcher. It goes into a trust account, and then from there he can take it out of that trust account and disperse it within the bank to other accounts, so that you can't trace it from the outside. They can do the same thing when they send it out of the Vatican Bank to another bank. Now, we were tracing all these movements of money because they started trading Falcone's money and they started distributing it. And if you remember,
okay, now I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but this is this is very interesting. It looks like they've taken your website down.
Oh boy, well, there you go.
So I mean, as someone try to go there besides me, at least I'm being blocked right now. I can't get in. It's called White Hats with an S at the end, hatsreport.com, correct?
Yeah.
And I just tried to get there in 2 different ways. I'm not getting there. So
you're right. It's down.
All right, as we speak. So that's where everyone listening decide whether we're telling the truth or not, and judge for yourself. Why would they hit the site, you know, if it wasn't the truth? So that's, you know, and just for the heads up for the person that called me today and said, oh, they've taken down the cabal. Well, maybe they haven't quite taken down the cabal. Maybe they're still at war with the cabal. So, you know, I wouldn't, you know, raise the victory flag quite yet. But nonetheless, we are still alive and we are talking about these kinds of things. So they're probably fighting the good fight. So I'm glad to see it. I just think they need to bring the American people in on it, in on the fight. But don't let me get on a soapbox here. So, okay, to continue. So your site is down, but you were saying something about Falcone. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we started watching the movement of the money with Falcone, and during 2012, if you remember, when McCain ran against Obama, and McCain could not decide on who his VP choice was, and it was at the very end of the time when he should have picked someone. He picked Palin, Sarah Palin from Alaska, which really nobody knew. Well, the person that he wanted to pick was Romney, but they couldn't vet Romney because Romney had gotten the proceeds of the trading programs from Bush, based on the fact that he helped rip off Ed Falcone. Okay. So if he would have done disclosures, he would have had a hard time explaining where he got all that money. Okay. So they couldn't pick Romney for vice president. That's who McCain wanted to. And they kept trying to vet him, and they kept trying to figure out how they were going to do it. And they weren't able to get it done. So McCain finally gave up and went to pick Sarah Palin, but they want to do Romney. Now, Romney did eventually release his tax returns, but he didn't release the years in which he got paid. What he did is he released the years after that and what was so interesting was, in those years after that, it shows his income coming from overseas accounts. Okay. And it was interest income. So if you take that and you say, okay, and nobody ever did this, but it was millions. Okay. Nobody ever said, well, wait a minute, you know, based on the returns that you can get at a bank, which are what, 1 or 2 or 3%, how much principal would have to be in those banks to generate that much interest? And nobody ever did that. But Romney was able to hide it because he reported his income off of those accounts, but he never reported what the principal was. Okay, so he was able to avoid it, because if he would have ran for vice president, he would have to disclose his tax returns or his income, and when he did that, he would have to explain where he came up with, I don't know how much they ended up paying him, 400 million or more. He would have had to explain where the 400 million came, and he couldn't. So that's why McCain didn't choose him. So anyway, that's the story with that. So as we went forward, we were getting a lot of flack. We were getting a lot of flack from people saying, well, you guys are just making this stuff up. You don't have the real, you don't have the real information. This is just all BS. So at some point we said, okay, we're going to start releasing documents. And we did. We started releasing documents as they related to the Tropos. And that was 83 billion, I believe, that was sent from overseas to the US, and the money just disappeared out of the system, just disappeared. It was supposed to be wire transferred to an account, I forget where, in the United States, and it just, they initiated the wire from overseas, and it didn't get to the account that it was supposed to, and they could never find the money, and nobody wants to talk about it. It's the same situation with Leo Wanta. The money just is in the system, and it gets diverted, and nobody knows where it went. So anyway, we were reporting on all these things. And in the meantime, in the background, Falcone was trying to get the FBI and all the authorities to investigate this and do something about it. He was writing letters everywhere. He had made flash drives that were given to all of our representatives in both the House and the Senate. They didn't do anything about it. He wrote letters to the Supreme Court. He wrote letters to Roberts. The copies of those letters are in our reports. I don't have I was going to go through the reports as we were talking, but we can't do that. So some of these documents were there. Now I'm building up to our grand finale, which was February of 2012. Now, if people care, they can write down White Hat report number 28, which at the bottom of the page, under White Hat comments, I explain what our objective was. Okay. And it's number one, to let the bad guys know that we knew what they were doing. Number two, to put pressure on Congress and law enforcement to do something about it. And then of course, the third priority was the readers themselves. So what we were doing is, it wasn't necessarily for public consumption as much as it was for public exposure, to let these guys know that we knew what was going on. I mean, there were times when I got a call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon saying, we're going to release a report tonight. And it's like, okay, get me the information. They would send me the information. I would work for the next 5 or 6 hours with other people. We would proof it. We would rewrite it and get it out that night, because it was information that had just occurred. It was talking about events that had just occurred that day. And we wanted to make sure we got it out in as quick as we could, so that they knew that we knew what they were doing. Okay. So we were playing a head game with them is really what it amounted to. And we had people, in various places who were giving us feedback on what was going on and what they were talking about, and, them carrying it around in the White House and in the Capitol, carrying around the reports. What are we going to do about this and all this kind of stuff? So, we were getting feedback. And so we were building up to report 36. And we knew it was coming. If you go back and look at 32 and 33, or maybe 33 and 34, we started giving the readers a hint. This was in January of 2012, that Falcone was in London and some other things were in London, and that there was going to be a release of some important information coming down the pike. And we put that in 2 or 3 reports. I know we did it in 33 and we did it in 34, and we may have done it in 35. Okay, well then on February 16th, 2012, Lord James gets up in front of the House of Lords, and he does not have, I knew at one point what the subject was, and he just stood up, got 10 minutes, and he went into Pure Heart, just launched into a 10-minute diatribe about Pure Heart, the Federal Reserve, the fraud, and everything associated with the $15 trillion that was wire transferred from the U.S. to Pure Heart in Europe, in three $5 trillion tranches over a 3-week period between April and May of 2009. Now, at that point in time, the total debt of the United States was 10 trillion. And these guys created out of thin air 15 trillion and sent it to Pure Heart in Europe. Okay. So that was, that was the big exposure. We thought, okay, now something's going to happen here. And of course, that information was given to the 535 congressional people and senators. We spread that as far and wide as we could. And, all we heard were crickets. So,
right. And so, but just let me say that there's a lot of people who talked about the Lord James, statements, and they're all on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching, at the House of Lords. And they don't know that you guys are the ones who got him the documents.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's interesting. Gordon Duff wrote up an article about it, which was wrong. And then other people have talked about it. And nobody wants to give us credit, and that's fine. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But if anybody wants to see the real documents, they're very interesting because a SWIFT has a lot of information on it. And I think one of the important things on those SWIFTs were that the security code used to make these to do these transactions, the security clearance code, was a Homeland Security of the United States government security code, the Homeland Security, and it says it right there on the SWIFTs. So, and Lord James explains that the way they offset this, or underpinned it, if you want to look at it that way, is they used fictitious gold from the person who did the trade, who entered into the trading program contract with them 6 years earlier, okay, because during that vetting process, they found out that he had gold on deposit at a bank of Indonesia. So they used that gold and, multiplied it by 10 or 100. They used that gold to underpin the $15 trillion to offset it on the balance sheet. And then they sent it over to Pure Heart. Okay. And then okay, so we can stop there. If you have questions, then we can go on about Pure Heart.
Right. Okay. So, but I do also want you to say, those names of accounts there, that's also been documented. And isn't it that guy? It was in Nexus magazine, I think, originally, but it's David Guyette, yeah, who also kind of popularized some of this information.
Oh yeah, he's Deep Black Lies, I think. I've corresponded with him.
To give him credit on his part, and then all the names, they're very weird account names like Baby and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. White
Boy and
White Spiritual Boy, which is another, that's WSB. Now, what does WSB stand for? Wall Street Bankers. So that's how they have them coded. They do this cutesy stuff, okay, and they think it's funny. They laugh about it. Oh yeah, they think it's a joke on all of us. But yeah, White Spiritual Boy. Mm-hmm. And just like Pure Heart, I mean, that's exactly the opposite of what they are. They don't have a pure heart. They probably don't even have a heart. But this is, and of course the 5-Star Trust and, some of these other things. Well, it's like the Patriot Act, it's not, I mean, the Patriot Act is put in place to go after the Patriots is what they're, is what it exactly. Is. I mean, it's just the way they do it. It's their own private joke. Mm-hmm. Okay. So
Guyette, or however you say his name, is there anything to be said along these lines with regard to the things he released quite a number of years ago?
Yeah, there's and if it's still up, and I haven't been to his site in a while, but he's done he's done very good work. There is a deposition of General Earl Cokie, who was deposed. He used to run the Nugent Hand Bank, if you remember the name. That bank sounds like it's a Vietnamese bank, and he was running it for trading programs. And there's a deposition that he was involved with, and Guyette got a hold of his deposition. And if anybody wants to, it is the most fascinating thing you'll ever read. It talks about the trading programs and and I knew a guy who knew General Cokie, by the way, that used to talk to him all the time. And what General Cokie said was it was more difficult to get in to see John Reed at Citibank than it was to see the President of the United States. So that tells you who runs the show.
Well, yeah, and that gets into, there's a book, and I think it's Daniel Estelin, but I could double check while I'm online here, because I don't want to get the reporter's name wrong. But he wrote it was fiction, and it's called something like God, what is it called? It's not Trail of the Octopus. That's another great book, but I'll remember it. It's got Phoenix or something like that in the title. Anyway, he basically documents, the death of this reporter who broke open this story as well in the United States, and then was killed. And this all gets into the promised software and the AI, the beginnings of AI, and the financial, reporting that basically is targeting all the people around the world, but anyway, it's a huge story. So all of this trail of the octopus is linked up, and one of the main tentacles seemed to go to this head of Citibank, strangely.
Yeah, Reed was, I wasn't at that point in time when I was heavily into this, which I still am to a certain degree, but not as much as I used to as far as actively doing investigations, although I can still do them. Reed was like, I don't want to use the term God, but he was just like the all-powerful guy that everybody used to talk about at Citibank. And it's interesting that General Cokie, by the way, is the one who confirmed that. It's interesting, in a deposition under oath that General Cokie basically confirmed that. I mean, it's funny to read it the way he talks about it, because he's just he's a hard ass military guy, and he's just very matter of fact. You can almost hear him, in the deposition, and David Guyette has that on his site. At least he used to, and he's done great work. And that's one of the best things that he does have, in my opinion, because it does prove that there are, it doesn't prove, but it indicates that there are people who are aware of the trading programs.
Yeah, and actually I found the book. It is called The Octopus Deception. If you want to read it, it's a great read. And it is Daniel Estelin is the reporter who wrote the book. He wrote it as fiction because otherwise he'd be killed.
Right.
And it follows the trail of the money and the death of this reporter whose name at the exact moment is escaping me, but I'll get it while we're talking and say it. So, because, that was a whole trail that I went down years, even before Camelot. And I think it's really an important story, but we can't go into all that here. But anyway, so, okay, so continue the story. So now where do you go?
Okay, so when we put out a report, and we put out 36, and 36 kind of in the beginning, we had been holding this information because everybody was asking, who are you? What are your credentials? We were getting bombarded from every corner. And so we started dribbling out some documents. And then once Lord James went to the House of Lords and did his speech, then in 40, I think we put some documents out in 36, and then we did a full document dump in 41. So anyway, when we identified it went to Pure Heart at that point in time really didn't mean much to us, because we didn't know, it's okay. So it's on this Swift and it's Pure Heart. Now, I think I have talked about this, and it was maybe when we were talking about 48 back in the radio days when we lost that one. But anyway, what happened was we had been tracking the global settlements, and we were getting information that somebody over in, gosh, and I can't remember now where it was. I think it was Sweden maybe, or Norway, or somewhere over in there, was stopping the release of the trading program. So we basically had set up surveillance on this house. We knew where it was coming from, but we could never see the person. Well, as it turns out, that once we found out about Pure Heart, we got the name Pure Heart, we started checking into that, and it happens to track back to General Rossier, and that was the same person that we had set up surveillance on overseas to find out who it was. And we found out later the reason we never could see him is because there was an underground tunnel system, and every time he left his house, he went downstairs, went into the tunnel and out, a block or two away, and walked his dog and went to the park and did all this other stuff, and then went down into the tunnel and entered his house. So it was kind of a cathartic moment because, if anybody remembers Foundation X, where Lord James got up in the House of Lords and talked about this foundation that wanted to give him, I don't know how many billions of dollars at the UK. Foundation X was Pure Heart, was Pure Heart. Okay, that's who Foundation. He says, I will call them Foundation X. That's not their real name, but I will refer to them as Foundation X. So over in that part of the world, our guys were on Pure Heart from that point forward. And so that's why Lord James was the one who came up and talked about Pure Heart, because basically that faction in the UK had stayed on that Pure Heart thing, and they were trying to find out who are they and who are these people. So anyway, it kind of came together that the same people who were stopping the global settlements were also Pure Heart. And so once we put that information out there, we got, I don't want to say deluged, but we got contacted by a lot of people who knew Pure Heart, but they didn't realize they had done business with Pure Heart, or at least attempted to do business with them, but they didn't really know who they were. And they were like, oh my gosh, we didn't have any idea these guys were this connected, right? So there was one weekend that they all flew in from different parts of the country, brought documents. We sat down and broke bread and, that for a whole weekend, and went through a lot of stuff. So we ended up then going down the Pure Heart Trail, and that's what took us into what was going to be 48, because going down the Pure Heart Trail, we couldn't figure out who this General Rossier was. There was no background on him whatsoever. And he held himself out to be a general, and all these, he's got a story. Well, if you're a fictitious character, I guess you can make up any background you want. And it was, it was just unbelievable. And if we do 48, when we do 48, we'll come out with all the stuff that he claimed. So anyway, we were able to then find out about the group of five, the 5-Star Trust. Who was in the group of 5? Well, Rossier was in the group of 5, but that wasn't his name then. Well, what was his name? Well, it ends up to be, his name was Ferrara, Roberto Ferrara. And I know it's not a name that anybody knows, and that's by design, but back in probably the late 50s, early 60s, and this is what 48's about. It's about the shadow government when it was started, and it was started by what they call, well, it wasn't, I don't think these were the guys who started it. These were just the guys who were going to put it into, they were going to put it into process. And that was George Bush, Richard Armitage, William Colby, Ferrara, and Edward Lansdale. Which, I'll dovetail just a bit. It's interesting that both Lansdale and Bush are connected in some circles to the Kennedy assassination. What a surprise.
And so anyway, that's in essence the coup that really put the secret government in place, in my opinion. And Kennedy was the last gasp of what America could be, and wasn't to be at that time. And whether we have another shot at it now is in question, but possibility. Just want to throw out Daniel Casolaro is the journalist that I was trying to remember his name, to do with the Trail of the Octopus. And there's a lot more to that story. So if you want to see that, read that book, The Octopus Deception. It's about his death, and a well-written book by the journalist Daniel Estelin. So just wanted to make that footnote. So what we're really disclosing is a lot of really good stuff here. And so go ahead. So you're saying the Gang of Five, and you named them, and those names are really important if you're someone who wants to research and understand how this whole thing kind of got together. And I do think there's more to it, but for what you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this and the origins and who was involved, and we're going to put that when we do 48. We're going to put that in 48. So we'll because I mean the origin are not those five. The origins go deeper than that. It's just that those were the five who were going to put place. And so what that is today, it's what we've referred to in our reports as the cabal. Other people refer to it as the shadow government, and now the term is the deep state. But this is who we're talking about. And it's interesting how if you go back and they've done some of this, you've gone back and looked at Lansdale's history and where he was. It's very interesting because it sort of fits the profile that you would expect to see. And, some of these guys have been on the radar. Bush Sr. has been on the radar. Colby was on the radar. Armitage to a certain degree. Lansdale, not so much. After they assassinated Kennedy, I think he retired in 64, 65. So he didn't stay much longer after that. And then Ferrara was basically the guy who they knew nothing about. Now, Ferrara got himself jammed up in a federal case in Chicago in the late 90s. He served time for a fraud. It sounds like it was a trading program from the information I've been able to get, and that was through Pacer. I wasn't able to read I didn't, it was so old that it was in the archives, and you'd actually have to go to Chicago and order it out of the archives to read all of the documents in there. But it sounded like he got nailed on a trading program. He spent some time in prison, released him to a halfway house, which I believe was in California, and then he died 6 months later. Well, he didn't really die. He just remade himself into General Laurent Rossier. So that's what 48's about. We've got documents. We've got a lot of information. You know the story of that because you were involved. You back half to that as for projects. And the funding for the Black
you were
projects.
Breaking up, but yes. So I wrote a report for that and all that kind of stuff. So which is called Black Project Projects Follow the Money, and that report is still available on my website. You can just do a search for that name. And just for the people that know that we're saying, the link to the whitehatsreport.com is actually, I typed it wrong in the link, but actually the link itself goes to the right place. So I know I'm correcting it as we speak here, but I just wanted you to know that it always went to the right place. And even though it's typed wrong, it's kind of a funny thing.
Is it still down?
I assume it is, but anyone wants to go there and check, they can. Now, okay, so where are you going to go from here?
We're working on something right now that's going to make it's going to make the 15 trillion look like pocket change, literally. And I don't know, that's going to take a while to come out. And, based on everything that's happening now with the deep state, the cabal, the shadow government showing itself in every single phase of operation, from the media to the Senate, to the Congress, to the FBI, to the DOJ. I mean, Trump is just making these people crazy. And I am writing a blog post that I'll put up sometime. It's going to be a long one about exposure versus disclosure. What we're seeing is exposure. So they're getting exposed everywhere.
Your site is back up, by the way. I just tested it.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, good. All right. So 48 would have been about the deep state. It would have been about the origin that as far as what we've been told and what we know. We've got documents. I've got to deal with, I don't know, 300 or 400 pages of documents that we wanted to release with that. I think I've shared some of them with you. You know what I'm talking about. That show the kind of things that these guys have been doing over the years. We've got, if you do 5-Star Trust, you can, you can check that. There's all kinds of information on the internet about the 5-Star Trust, which was the origin of the group of 5. So anyway, that led us down that path. Now we were going to do 48. We decided not to for various reasons.
Well, I mean, I want you to say, because there were death threats.
That was part of it. That was not all of it. That was part of it. You always bring that up. Okay, here's what happened. We were advised not to do it. That's what it amounted to, from a very credible, trusted source. We were advised that it would be a bad idea to do that. I think those were the exact words, or it would not be a good idea to do it. So other things were going on. It's one of those things with that is that you might expose people that you don't want to expose, and so it's hard to speak for them. I mean, we know the danger, we know the deal. We can go ahead and do what we're going to do and take the consequences, but we can't, kind of unilaterally make that decision for everybody else. I think at this point in time, that situation has changed just a little bit. And I think that it's timely now for that to come out, because I think if we do release that, it will give everybody a roadmap on how we got from there to here, and have a little bit of an understanding about it, and maybe give people an idea of how vast this thing is, because it basically controls every part of our life. And this is what Trump's fighting right now. Right. Okay. So that, and I think everybody has to understand that. You got to look at this. When somebody fights Trump, they're standing up and they're identifying themselves as a bad guy. That's what's going on. And that includes McCain, it includes Graham, it includes Schumer, it includes Pelosi, it includes Flake, it includes Corker, it includes any of these people, Ryan, it includes any of these people who are openly going against Trump. That anybody in the Justice Department, the FBI, all those people, they're just identifying themselves as deep state tools, is what they're doing. Right. So that's what's happening. And so looking back, it would be nice to have 48 out there, because everybody could read 48 and they can understand what they're seeing today. We got contacted. I was contacted by someone who was running down some things on 9/11, and we had a conference call. T-Man and I had a conference call with that person tonight, and he's trying to pursue some things to force people to talk about 9/11, and he wants to do it, legally, and he wanted a referral, and everything the guy, he's in construction, so everything the guy's saying is true. He knows that those buildings don't come down because planes fly into them. He knows the building codes. He knows the structural. He knows all those things. So he knows it's BS. So he came to us to go, do you have a DC lawyer? Do you have somebody you can refer us to, so I can take this to court and get subpoenas and depositions and do all this kind of stuff. And it was kind of interesting, because we had to basically say, you might as well save your money, because you're not going to be successful, because you're fighting the whole swamp. And it's interesting. It just was indicative to me that here's a person who so clearly sees that 9/11 was not what they're presenting it to be, yet he doesn't see the bigger picture of what's really going on. Right. And I don't understand that. It's like, how can you not understand the big picture if you've been given a glimpse into what's going on? How can you not open your mind up to the fact that, it's bigger than just that? If they can pull that off, they can pull anything off. Right. And the amount of the control. And so it's just, I don't know. I don't know. I just get, it's just amazing to me every day. So anyway, our our advice to him was just sit tight for about 4 to 6 months and see what happens.
Right.
And then you might be able to, come in and do something. So.
Right. Well, I mean, we're really in an age of disclosure, meaning disclosure of truths. And and it is fascinating. And this is really involved. We also haven't said, anything about MJ12 and, the creation of that organization and how instrumental that is. So the Gang of Five has to interplay with that organization.
Yes, Kerry. Yes. I mean, it all, the metamorphosis of this shadow government, of the group of five, of MJ12, it all happens at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's connected.
Yeah, it is absolutely connected. And then there's the whole Promise, you want to call it Promise software story, which is gets into the whole Black projects situation, as well as targeting. It actually comes to the drone stories that you're hearing right now, where people are being targeted around. They're basically, the beginnings of that targeting system was put in place through the Promise software, believe it or not, and that became what is in essence the AI that is now being used. So that trail is really very fascinating, and it's long and winding, but it's worth pursuing if you're interested. And I always look for people who will come on my show to talk about that, but they are very few and far between. And a lot of these people, they won't come forward, or they only come forward for a tiny piece of it. And there's been a couple of times when I've had a few people who kind of followed the trail all the way. But yeah, it's very difficult. Of course, Daniel Estelin could speak to that as well. And I have tried to get him on my show, but to no avail. I mean, I never know. And someone's putting in the chat, Field McConnell, and yes, those guys are really on a lot of things. Very, very good, investigators. And so, kudos to them. I have had them on my show, in case you don't know that, a couple times. But yeah, sure, could try that again. Anyway, so now you're in this juncture. You didn't. So how long was it that you did not publish for?
Well, I think it was about 3 or 4 years, 3 years maybe.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, because I can't believe that this thing has lasted as long as it has. I don't know, because you were very hot and heavy, right? For, I don't know, was it 2 years?
Yeah, it was just a little shy of 2 years. We did our first report in November of 2010, and I think our last report was in the latter part of 2012.
Okay.
When we stopped.
So this is where people don't, it's important to know your history, and especially this kind of history that's really revealing the deep state, what people like to call the deep state right now, the secret government, and where all the money goes, and all of these kinds of things. So this is not the whole picture, obviously, but it's a very important part of it. And the White Hats have been instrumental in uncovering some of this. And so that, basically makes you guys, your organization, heroes, American heroes, and, even heroes overseas, because you got a lot of overseas guys, I think, that are feeding you information, right?
Oh, yeah. And I it's interesting. We're thinking the same thing. I do want to mention that we have some people overseas who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And I know you know who I'm talking about, but they are the ones who ran this Pure Heart thing down, who have doggedly stayed on certain issues and basically spend their every waking hour, which is 18 to 20 hours a day, working on all of this stuff. So I think that, we're just the conduit to get the information out. There are a lot of people involved, and they're spread out all over the world because of the contacts that they have. But a lot of the stuff that we get comes from the UK, and they are, I have to say they are probably our strongest allies in this whole endeavor.
Right.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, because
yeah, but
recognition definitely needs to go in that direction.
Okay, but you're also, I mean, you're not just a conduit, because you've also yourself done a great deal of the heavy lifting in terms of the forensic financial analysis of all of this, which nobody could do without you, I would say, and in your organization. And obviously you and, well, very briefly, I think I can say T-Man. I did do an interview with T-Man. He got in a lot of trouble for that interview. But I think it's still on my website. I can't remember. I think it is. And that was a really interesting phone call. There's more to this story. It gets into what was supposed to be a complete changeover in the currencies around the world, right?
Yeah.
And
yes.
And all of that seems to, well, got stalled. And then there's a lot of disinfo about all of that out there, et cetera, et cetera. And so on. So we've been going for about an hour and a half. I do want to ask the people in the chat if they have any questions. So if you do have any questions for Paladin, do you want to put them in all caps with a question mark? It would help. And I will try to ask your question. And
you know, one thing, Kerry, I listened to your excellent interview yesterday with Mr. Snodgrass.
Yes.
And, you know, at one point he talked about, you know, that he did that for pay, and then he got $20,000 a month when he was in the States, and he got $50,000 a month when he was overseas. And, you know, nobody ever thinks, where does this money come from? And you know, I mean, it comes from the trading programs, you know, I mean, they move the drugs, they have their, I mean, I'll tell you, the CIA, I got to give them credit for one thing. They are probably the most creative entrepreneurs on this planet. The big money that they get for the black projects comes from the trading programs, because you cannot generate that kind of return on your investment any other place, including drugs. So, you know, that's where when you have a guy on that like that, and he tells you that 20,000, he gets 20,000 a month, and this was back in the 80s and the 90s. Not that's pretty good money today. That's $250,000 a year, but back then it would have even been, you know, valued more. And then he's overseas and he makes 50,000 a month, which is $600K a year for doing the stuff that he was doing. I mean, does anybody ever wonder where that money's coming from? I mean, you know, it's got to come from somewhere. So these guys, I mean, this is why they do the trading programs. They have all this money and they can pay these mercenaries big money to do it. And that's the way, you know, that's the way that it's done. And, you know, I kind of chuckled yesterday when you were interviewing him, and you know, you were kind of going down a path about, well, you know, why don't you know more about the operation than you know? Well, you know, that is the hallmark of a false flag is that, because, you know, let's take the Kennedy assassination, for example. You have the shooters, you got the spotters, you got the people who bring the guns, you got the people who are the decoys, you got the people who make the false identifications, you got the people that help in the getaway. And there's 5 or 6 factions, and I know Ole could probably explain this better than me, but all of these people have a function to perform, and that's all they really know. Okay, so they can surmise maybe the rest of the operation after it happens or after they get experience with it. But he's absolutely right. They don't tell them.
Sure.
You know, it's need to know. You don't need to know what the other people are doing. This is your job. You just do your job and get out of there. And you know, he tells it from the standpoint that they get caught. They can't rat out the whole thing. And he's absolutely right. So each one of those factions I named, they have a supervisor, a handler that tells them what to do. And all those handlers then are the ones who meet with the top people who do all the planning. And then it filters down that way. Now, the you know, the offset to that, or the downside to doing an operation that way, is that if something goes wrong, these separate factions can't help each other because they don't see the big picture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always the weakness of that plan. However, if you control the court system and you control the law enforcement, you can always cover up any problems that happen to an op. But that's the offset. Okay. Because the choice is, you either bring the guys in and tell them everything that's going on. So if something goes wrong, they can, you know, go to plan B, or they can go to their contingency plan and cover for somebody else or help somebody else or whatever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing of it is, because they have that protection of the law enforcement and the court system, they don't need to worry about that. Okay. So that weakness that they have is, those are the things that we see as, you know, people who look at these false flags, who look at Las Vegas, who look at Sandy Hook, who look at 9/11, who look at the Kennedy assassination. Those are the things that we see. Those are the things that jump out, the mistakes. Okay.
Sure.
And so, you know, those are the things to look for in the false flag. And there's always going to be that weakness. There are always going to be things that they can't plan for, but they've got that handled because nobody knows what's going on. And if the worst thing that happens is that somebody gets caught, they can only give a part of what the story is or what the op is. And the thing of it is, like Oswald, you get caught, you get shot, you get silenced.
Right.
So they have ways to deal with that too. Because
I appreciate that, but I have to say that there is another side to that, and that's the human side. And what my experience is, and some of the back channel information I've gotten, is that that's true. That's the formula. But actually, then you have to enter in human nature. And human nature likes to talk. And so what you get are some of these guys, especially when they keep doing the operations, you know, they've been on the road for a long time, and they start to get to know each other, and they start to see the signs and signals, and they start to share information very carefully between themselves. And so this is when you'll get a guy, and especially a guy who's a psychic, as he turns out to be, which is, you know, Cody. So you're going to get Cody, who is going to know a lot more. And he also kind of went up a ladder, you could say, in responsibility. And so I have to say that, yeah, he probably kept his mouth shut. He was careful and all of that stuff. But they don't quite stay as dumb as they're supposed to. There's going to be levels at which they start to get more hip to what's really going on. And they do share information. And this is where, in the end, he got caught. Well, he got nailed for supposedly knowing too much about who was behind the scenes, which is the Clintons in his case. So, you know, yes and no. I agree with you. I understand the formula, but I think, you know, you got to bring the human nature into it. And I mean, they make movies about this, right? Where someone finds out too much. They stumble on knowing too much about the situation. And so,
yeah, but you got to understand too, is the more that they, I mean, it's just, you know, it's like any other organized crime situation. The more they prove their worth, the higher up on the hierarchy of the chain they go. Okay.
Right.
So yes, as they go higher, they're going to get more and more information, but they're still only going to be limited to what they actually do, and then what they can find out about from their colleagues. Okay. Mm-hmm. But they know that whatever they hear in hearsay from their colleagues, they're not going to talk about anyway, because it's not going to do any good in a court of law, because it's just hearsay anyway. It's not direct evidence.
Sure.
So that's what he was trying to say. And it was interesting. I had to chuckle a couple of times, because you would ask him a question and he would hesitate, and they would give you a one-word answer. And it's interesting, because because I have done the same thing with you, and I even made a mention of it to you after the show, that I do that sometimes. When you ask me a question, it's like I go into court mode, where the other side is asking me a question, and it's better that I don't elaborate. I just say yes.
I know, but I have to also say that there's also this what we're getting is a programmed answer. In other words, he's replying with what he's been programmed to say about that. When anybody asks him, does he know anything? No. And the reason he doesn't know anything is because blah, blah, blah. And so when he repeats that several times, and then that's a program. That's what I call, that's a mind control program. And so that is covering up incidents in which things leaked through, and he gradually, got hip to certain things.
That's whenever you get a hesitation and then you get a yes or a no and you get a one-word answer, that's your cue then to dive into that and ask him more questions. And he probably would give you answers. Okay.
Well, he did, as you saw the interview. Yeah. And this is the kind of thing, these are the kind of conversations Paladin and I have. Paladin used to do some interrogations himself. So he is quite, he doesn't just sort of describe his experiences about that too much, but at all. But I have to say that that's where, in other words, being an interviewer and being an interrogator, they're not exactly the same thing, obviously, but you can see how skills that you can use in one can be useful in the other. And it is very interesting. And in the end, yesterday, we got some information that had not been disclosed previously, having to do with remote viewers and the skill set that this person has. And I would venture to say, and I think Cody's a lovely guy, and he's really trying to do the right thing at this point. And I think that there is a lot of buried stuff there. And, Duncan O'Finian comes to mind. You can't get around it. And then, because I'm dealing with these kind of characters a lot over the past 12 years that I've been doing this. So I see the signs of forgetfulness, the signs of something's buried under something else.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And I think some of that probably has to do with the fact that he reached a point where he woke up and realized what he was doing. And it dawned on him when they approached him to do Oklahoma City that they had been doing these kinds of things and that he had been a part of it. And I think that gave him a wake-up call to say, these guys aren't very good guys. It's because they lure him in with the money and the adventure and all that kind of stuff. I know how it goes. And so these people, he gets in and he starts having fun and he gets paid good money. And at some point in time, he wakes up and he looks back on some of the things he did. And it's hard for him. I would assume it's hard for him to come to terms with some of the things he did, because at that point, then he says, I wonder what else, happened during this op where this is all I did, but I wonder what else happened. And
some of it's in history. So, some of it's actually come out, over the years. Yeah, and of course, the Nicolas Cage, gun, I forget the name of that movie, but it's a great movie. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But it's about a gun sales guy and a lot of the other things he gets involved in as a result of being involved in that world, and so this is kind of what we're talking about. I want us to say that also, I have a secret contact who I won't say anything about, but I can tell you that he used to get bags of money, cash, dropped off at his front porch. That's how he was paid for his operations.
Yeah.
Huge bags of cash. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's also worth noting. All right. So again, I was going to just look at the chat, and I'm sorry, guys. We just got off on that thing. Somebody wants to know your thoughts regarding the Pope and the Vatican.
Yeah. Well, they're part of the whole European bloodline thing. I mean, the Vatican, gosh, we could talk about the Vatican for a long time. I go back to the tripod, the three-legged beast, which is DC, Vatican, and the City of London. Yeah. And they're all connected because they're all sovereign places. So therefore, they operate independent of any oversight from anybody. The Vatican handles the spiritual side. The City of London handles the financial side, and DC handles the military side. They're the security. They're the cops. They're they're the leg breakers. They're the bad guys. So, the Vatican and the Pope are bad. I mean, they're, and they things have been coming out on, their pedophilia runs rampant. They're a reincarnation of the Roman Empire. The mafia and the Roman Catholic Church are one and the same thing. The mafia is, and the Godfather, which one was it, 3 or 4 or whatever, when Michael went over to the Vatican and talked to the Pope and all this kind of stuff. So that's, the Vatican are the bad guys. And while we were talking about the Vatican Bank, and I know you and I've talked about this, and I may have talked about it before, but a few years ago, they had an announcement that the Vatican Bank found several $100 billion or billion euros off balance sheet. And it's like, wait a minute, off balance sheet? Why is it off balance sheet? Which that indicates that there are 2 sets of, they got 2 sets of books going. So anyway, yeah. It was kind of interesting. And nobody asked the question, well, why was it off balance sheet? What was, why is there an off balance sheet thing? And I think that to answer, your listener's question, the Pope and the Vatican are the European bloodlines. I would love to spend some time down in the basement or the catacombs of the Vatican, because I think that's where all the secrets are. I think that's where all the, I think that's where Caesar took all of the documents that they got out of the library of Alexandria before they burned it to the ground, and told us that they burned up all that stuff in the fire. I think Caesar went in, he pulled all that stuff out, and that's where it is, in the Vatican. And I think that's where a lot of the secrets are.
Absolutely. And my interview with Leo Zagami should answer that question in a much more intricate way. So go to Project Camelot, my YouTube channel, and look for Leo. Just put Leo, you'll find the interview in the search. Now, someone is asking about confirming the CIA, the coup, well, actually the invasion of the CIA by Trump, some military guys. And there were definitely, you want to talk about that?
I suppose.
Well, I just had I'll just say, right off the bat.
I can address it, and then you can address it too.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, yep. You just sounded a little reluctant, so I
am a little bit, only because this is information that I'm getting that I can't confirm, I can't say for sure, but what we've been told was that the Marine Expeditionary Force did land at the CIA 3-4 weekends ago on a Saturday. They went inside, they got files, they got computer drives. They didn't arrest anybody because they don't have that power, but they did go in and take control of documents of the CIA, and they left. It's all part of Operation Drumstick. Part of that operation had to do with putting more troops in Afghanistan to go after the Bush crime families' processing labs for heroin and opioids. I think if you go back in time and you look at the heroin problem that has come to the United States, you will see that it coincides exactly to when we went in and invaded Afghanistan. So part of Operation Drumstick was nailing CIA headquarters. Part of Operation Drumstick was gearing up in Afghanistan to go over there and bomb and destroy the drug processing labs. So, and I even heard the other day where the White House basically admitted that Trump was developing a new intel unit that was separate from the CIA and some other agencies, which is interesting, which indicates to me that there may be something coming down against the CIA very shortly.
Right. And of course, that company is, it's a multifaceted, it has, I would say, bad guys and good guys within it. And yes, they are at war with each other. And I've heard this many times. I will say that I got a phone call today that also verified this sort of invasion into the CIA and happening a few weekends ago. They used a terminology that, you know, I don't know military hardware, but they said something about what sounded like, I don't know, some kind of airplanes or something, and that landed. And
the Ospreys.
Yes.
The Ospreys.
Yes.
Yeah, the helicopter. Yeah.
So is that a helicopter?
Yeah, it's a tilt rotor helicopter. It's very maneuverable. And I forget how many troops it'll carry, 20 or 30 troops, maybe something like that.
Right.
So yeah, the Osprey, the tilt rotor.
And then, you know, there have been some simultaneous happenings, which is, people will have seen. There's an article that came out where Rothschild is basically complaining to the press that, you know, Trump is now fighting the New World Order, you know, saying it's a bad thing. And which is actually, I thought was hilarious. And then the other thing was that Obama actually was prompted by God knows who to say that that Trump is like Hitler in the 1930s or something. And so this is all, you know, the blowback that these guys are obviously in on the deep state, if you will. And they don't like what's happening, and they've been called forward to complain and try to rally around their troops anyway. It's very interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of this. You know, the question becomes, and I appreciate some people are trying to say, okay, this is it. They're taking them down. Not so fast, because there's a lot more to it. And I will say that next week I'm going to have John Brandenburg on the show. And he's a fascinating guy. I had him on my show not that long ago. He's written a book that apparently was passed around, he's now told me. I think I can say this. I hope I can. Inside the upper echelons of the government. And it's all about a kind of a civil war, and basically the administration, there being a split in this country of the United States. And this is a fictional book that he wrote, but he's a guy who's quite in the know, or was at one time, and quite a very smart guy. And he wrote a sort of fictional rendition, but don't forget that it involves also the invasion of the underground bases, the Greys, the human hybrid programs, and the fact that the military has to make up for, you know, deals they made with these off-planet races to allow the humans to be abducted, eaten, used as guinea pigs, and so on and so forth, in Dulce and other underground bases. So there's a lot more to this war, you know, for taking back the deep state than people really realize. And you're not going to probably hear this anywhere else but here. So I just want you to be aware of that. I will be talking to him about his book next week. I think we agreed on Thursday night. So stay tuned for that if you want to hear more about what's really going on. So that was that topic. Let me see if there's any other quick questions I can get.
Financial reset.
Okay. Do you want to? Well, that's a huge subject. I don't know. I didn't say that. I don't know if somebody asked the question, but you're welcome to say what you like about it. Go ahead.
Well, I think that, you know, and I think we've talked about this before. I think we talked about it when during the Cliff High interview. You know, about I mean, go back and look at the history of BRICS and how they've basically bloomed and blossomed into now, you know, it's the Infrastructure Asian Bank or Asian Infrastructure Bank, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, you know, everything's moving to China. And so I think we need to pay attention to that we're looking at a global reset at some point in time. The old guard, which would be the European bloodlines, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. Oh, that reminds me something about Rockefellers. But anyway, the Rothschilds are going to lose control of the banking system here pretty shortly, because the Chinese, as everybody knows, has been accumulating gold for a long time, going back to the Silk Road days. And they are going to, at some point, convert their currency to an asset-backed currency, which is going to create a situation where all the other countries are going to have to go to the same type of asset system. If they don't, then their currencies are basically going to be worthless. When you go from having currencies that are not backed by anything other than confidence to a system where they're backed by something tangible, an asset or group of assets, basket of assets, whatever you want to call it, it's going to change. It's going to change the it's going to change the course of the financial system. Now, one thing I can put out there that with a caveat that supposedly the TRNs have already been printed and they're in some of the banks. They haven't been released yet. And so that is the new money for us, for the United States. Now there's a battle because the Federal Reserve, of course, is there. And as everybody probably knows, there's a changing of the guard. Janet Yellen is, I think, going to lose, she's going to step down from the chairmanship or whatever it's called, directorship in January or February. They've got 5 new governors coming in, including the head of the Federal Reserve. And I think we're going to see we may see a change there. If China flips the switch and changes their yuan and has it backed by gold and other assets, that's going to cause a domino effect that's going to go all over the world. And the United States and the Federal Reserve, if they don't get ahead of that, are going to be in bad shape. So that's what's going on. That's what Trump is dealing with. That's what the part of the trip to the Far East that he took 3 or 4 weeks ago, that's what part of that had to do with. If you notice, he went to Japan, he went to China, he went to Vietnam, and he went to the Philippines. And of course, the Philippines, we could do a whole show on the Philippines, but he went to the money places where he met with Putin, he met with Xi, however you'd pronounce his name. And from what we're being told, they had private meetings about how they were all going to fight the cabal, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what Trump's fighting now. Interestingly enough, coming back to the United States, I think this whole Mueller thing, this whole DOJ thing, this whole FBI thing involving Comey, Mueller, and all this stuff is starting to implode on a daily basis. There was just something released tonight where a DOJ guy had been demoted because he had gotten involved with the Fusion GPS thing beforehand. Another thing I'll put in, which you and I talked about earlier this evening, I think we're going to see the end of, and I agree with what you heard, and you can elaborate on it if you want to, but I think we're seeing the end of the Clinton crime family. And I think the signaling of that, beginning of that end, was Donna Brazil's book being published. I don't think under normal circumstances that kind of a book would ever have been published. There's interesting things that she discloses in there. Of course, she disclosed what everybody already knew anyway, and that was that the Clintons controlled the DNC. And I think that the Democrats don't want that to be the case anymore. So they're turning against the Clintons. And I also think that we're going to reopen this email thing. I think the Inspector General is going to come out with some interesting information in the next few weeks that's going to really blow the DOJ and the FBI sky high. I feel sorry for Christopher Wray. I watched some of his testimony today. I'm kind of neutral on him. I'm not sure yet. Time will tell on how he's going to be, but I think there's going to be some things that are going to be forced. And, it goes back to Trump. I mean, Trump just irritates everybody. And they stand up, they identify themselves as bad guys because they attack him, because they're afraid of what he's going to do. And so love him or hate him, cheer him on, because he's really trying to take the U.S. back. And I think, I mean, some of us that have been old enough to see him go through all of his crap and, file his bankruptcies and do all of his stuff. And, I mean, he's maybe hard to take, but I don't care. He's a president that's actually doing the right thing for the country. And so I think we need to give him all the support that we can, and go from there. I mean, the White Hats have always prided ourselves that we go after everybody who are bad guys. We went after the Bushes. We went after Obama. We went after Clintons. We went after Romney. We went after all the bad guys. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. And the thing about Clinton is, and it's interesting because you kind of had to kind of set Tony Gosling straight when you did his interview, because I think outsiders look at Trump and they're trying to measure him against what they think a world leader is, and the only people that they have to compare him to are the other world leaders who are controlled by the cabal and the deep state and the European crime families and the bloodlines and all this other stuff. So you really can't. And he's really the guy that we need at this point, because if you have your eyes open, you know what's going on. You want somebody who's going to come in and dismantle things. Okay. You want a wrecking ball. And that's exactly what Trump is. He's a wrecking ball. I mean, he's driving these guys crazy. They're just beside themselves. The media is just going nuts over him, and they're losing. I mean, the more that they expose themselves, the more that people are waking up and starting to see what's going on, and the magnitude of it is going to be. It's just. I mean, you understand it, Kerry, because you've been exposing it for a long time, and it does go to the space program. I mean, and the black projects, because when we talked during the Pure Heart investigation or the Pure Heart phase of things, we spoke to what's his name, the attorney McCall.
Oh,
and he gave us all this information about the bloodlines and how this was all set up to keep the bloodlines in power. And it was a big long 100-year, 500-year plan. And, they had technology that was 50,000 years ahead of what we have now. And, and that's why we got with you to write the second half of 48, because you are aware of what happens when that money goes down that dark hole and surfaces over in the black projects and the secret space program, because that's what funds it. That's exactly what funds it. And they fund it from the trading programs, and the money goes off balance sheet, and then it gets distributed and it goes down that black hole, and it surfaces in the black projects and the secret space program.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've really covered the gamut tonight. So I don't know. People should spread the word that this particular interview is really uncovering a lot of, lifting up a lot of stones and showing what's underneath. And you're not going to get this kind of stuff very many places out there, especially not in order. And yeah, it is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of nuance here and things that aren't being revealed. There's also, I just want to say that I did an interview with BitShare's Stan Larimer, and he happens to have worked in basically the space program. He worked for the aerospace companies, and I think, if I recall, I think he's a physicist. Anyway, his knowledge, it's his son who kind of did the BitShares part, but he's very knowledgeable, and he basically, spills the beans on China and all the miners for Bitcoin being located in China and therefore vulnerable to being controlled. And this is where 2/3 of Bitcoin is basically residing at this point. So there's a lot more going on with regard to the financial system, and to, yes, there are techies who can talk to this and talk to that in very idealistic ways, even at times. But there's also the nitty gritty, and no one seems to, there are not enough people are really picking up with that, that piece of information and running with it. And there's probably a lot more behind it. I can tell you that Stan Larimer, if you watch my interview, comes across as a guy who knows a lot more than he is saying, and he says quite a bit on my show. So these are the kinds of things we're working to uncover, and where it's all going to lead gets to the AI, gets to quantum computing, gets to D-wave machine, and there's a whole lot more behind that. So again, it's, don't pack it all up and go on vacation yet, thinking that we've won, so to speak. There are going to be certain people out there that have a very rather superficial view of this whole game that we're part of. Anyway, so any parting words, Paladin?
No, I just think that everybody should sit tight. They should support Trump. They should pay attention to what's going on, because all the information is being revealed to us on a daily basis. It's going so fast, it's hard to keep up with. We are working on a huge exposure that probably will be in the making here. Maybe, I don't know when. I don't even want to guess when we can maybe bring it out. But it's a big exposure that's going to be a lot more than what we exposed with the Pure Heart, the $15 trillion transfers. I'm going to put together 48. I've decided, and everybody sort of agrees that it's probably a good thing we come out with 48. Now, it's probably because it's been so long and we didn't come out with it. It's probably not going to have as big a splash as what it did initially. So I'm probably going to break it up into 3 or 4 or 5 parts and kind of spoon feed it, just so everybody kind of is able to play along, because there's so much information there, and there's so many links that we're going to provide so people can go read, what we're talking about, point you in certain directions. We've got a whole lot of documents that we want to release. So that will kind of give you a foundation and a basis about the shadow government, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And then you can tie that into what's going on today. Our other project that we're working on, it may be, it could be the middle of next year before that comes to fruition. But we do need, a bigger audience, because that's, that could take down the whole thing. So that's what we're working on. And just to say, we haven't stopped working, even though we stopped doing reports, we haven't really stopped working. And because Trump got elected, it was a good time now to come back out and start talking. It's not going to jeopardize any of the things that we're doing behind the scenes. It could probably enhance them to a certain degree. So that's kind of why we're coming back out.
All right. So it's great to talk to you, and I'm glad we got to do this. I've been meaning to do it for quite some time. So it's great that, we finally kind of tied you down and got you to commit to coming on and really telling the history of the White Hats as best can be told. And, in what it's now about a 2-hour interview. So thank you so much, Paladin. Really appreciate it. And want to give out your website. I guess the word is it's back up, and my links are now corrected. So I think that should be easy to find. The links were always right, but the name on it was wrong. So anyways, correct. And that's on my website, projectcamelot.tv. So Paladin, I'll let you go. Do you want to give your website and any other pertinent?
Yeah.
And email, if you want people to write to you, how can they write to you?
Paladin@whitehatsreport.com. I have been getting some email from people, and I've tried to answer that, as quickly as possible within reason, and answer questions and that kind of thing. So yeah, they can contact it at Paladin@whitehatsreport.com. The website, if it's back up, it's whitehatsreport.com. And I just want to say, I noticed somebody was asking about Q in the scroll in the chat, and I don't know how I want to say this. They appear to be legitimate. We don't have any inside information on who that person is. There's a lot of speculation that it could be Trump himself. I don't think that's the case. There is speculation it could be that Steve Miller. I think that's more likely who it is. And I think we just have to wait and see about Q's information. I have not been following it. I have read a little bit of it, but it's really, it's written in riddles and it's clues and all this kind of stuff. And it's really kind of hard to decipher, although there are some things out there that I think are significant. They talk about the NSA. And I think one thing that everybody needs to understand is the NSA and the CIA are not best friends. They are not best friends at all. Okay. So I think everybody needs to understand that. Supposedly Rogers went to brief Trump in December before he took office. Rogers seems to be, and that's the head of the NSA, seems to be not part of the cabal in the sense that he's not, they don't share information with the CIA. It's a problem. And you alluded to it earlier, Kerry. So I just wanted to say that about Q. I'm just not, I just, the jury's still out on Q because I don't know who they are and I don't know why they're doing what they're doing in the format of in which they're doing it. So I really, we really don't have any inside information, although we are finding it pretty entertaining because it is just putting information out there in a certain way. And I have not tracked, the predictions or the information to see if it's right or it's coming true or anything like that. So, probably everybody else is following it knows more about that than we do. But what I've said about the Marines and the CIA, that part I have a high confidence level for. So I think we need to watch that. The Operation Drumstick, if Trump has used the troops in Afghanistan to go after the drug labs, then you can be pretty assured that he is going full force against the cabal. And he's, crippling their cash flow machine, and that's going to cripple them the most.
Okay. So again, thank you again for being on the show, and we'll probably have you back in the future, no doubt. So thanks everyone for watching and listening. And I want to let everyone know that tomorrow at 3 p.m. on Friday, that's 3 p.m. Pacific time, I'm going to be on the Ella Free Revolution radio show. She's going to interview me, doing sort of returning the favor as I interviewed her a ways back on basic targeted individuals. So we're going to be talking about whatever I'm going to be talking about, whatever she asks me, I'll try to answer as best I can. So that'll be at 3 p.m. Tomorrow. All right. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, Kerry.
Okay. Take care.
Good night.
All right. Bye-bye. So,